Well, welcome to our session exploring the Behold a Black Horse. This is the second of two sessions, and I think you're going to need it, so let's have a word of prayer. Let's bow our hearts. Father, we thank you for your presence. We thank you for your word, and above all, Father, we pray that your Holy Spirit would reveal that which you have for us, that we might be more responsive to your will in our lives as we commit this hour and ourselves into your hands in the name of Yeshua, our coming King indeed. Amen. Well, this is the second session, and we're exploring Revelation chapter 6, verses 5 and 6, the black horse. And I love what Dean Packwood designed for our cover. It's one of the best I've seen. It certainly captures a complex topic that clearly he's got balances in his hand, and we notice the dollar bills all around his feet. It's very descriptive because, as we learned last time, it's a great deal about the whole issue of hyperinflation. And we covered that last time and tried to tie in that famine in our last century was deliberate, strangely, deliberate policies of the government. So in this session, we're going to explore a little bit the engine of power. We'll talk a little bit what I like to call the trail of blood, and this myth that has arisen up in America called the lone assassin myth. And I'll also leave you, though, with a surprising tool that may challenge you a little bit, but you may find useful as we close. So we're in the second of two sessions on the black horse. The Rothschilds have made quite a clear career by pointing out, he says, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." Very famous quote from him. And Karl Marx said something equivalent. He said, "Money plays the largest part in determining the course of history." And most of us fail to really understand the role of money itself in history. And the Bible tells us not to be ignorant of Satan's devices. That's an instruction, 2 Corinthians chapter 2. And that's part of our time this evening. We'll be focusing on that. Paul warns us that, quote, "we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." And you can apply that several different ways, each validly. But for a better understanding of these forces, we're going to explore some of the bizarre events in America's history that still to this day impacts us all. Well, I like to call the trail of blood. And we're going to start this glimpse by looking at Abraham Lincoln, who worked valiantly to prevent the attempts of the Rothschilds to involve themselves in financing the Civil War. And the Rothschild interests succeeded, however, through their agent, Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase, to force a bill, the National Banking Act, through Congress, creating a federally chartered central bank that had the power to issue U.S. banknotes. And Lincoln was concerned about this. He said, "The money power preys upon a nation in time of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than a monarchy, more insolent than an autocracy, more selfish than a bureaucracy. I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of our country. Corporations have been enthroned, an era of corruption will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed." That was Lincoln's assessment. He continued to fight against the central bank, and some now believe that it was his anticipated success in influencing the Congress to limit the life of the Bank of the United States to just the war years that was the motivating factor behind his assassination, and becomes a surprise to many of us. Modern researchers have uncovered evidence of a massive conspiracy that links Lincoln's Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, to join John Wilkes Booth, his 8 co-conspirators, and over 70 government officials and businessmen involved in the conspiracy to the Bank of Rothschild. And so the lone assassin myth is born here. It continues in our history. When Booth's diary was recovered by Stanton troops, it was delivered to Stanton. When it was later produced during the investigation, 18 pages had been ripped out. These pages containing the aforesaid names were later found in the attic of one of Stanton's descendants. From Booth's trunk, a coded message was found that linked him directly to Judah P. Benjamin, the Civil War campaign manager in the South for the House of Rothschild. And when the war ended, the key to the code was found in Benjamin's possession. The assassin, portrayed as a crazed lone gunman with a few radical friends, escaped by way of the only bridge in Washington not guarded by Stanton's troops. Booth was located hiding in a barn near Port Royal, Virginia, 3 days after escaping from Washington. He was shot by a soldier named Boston Corbell, who fired without orders. Whether or not the man that was killed was Booth is still a matter of contention. But the fact remains that whoever it was that was killed had no chance to identify himself. It was Secretary of War Edwin Stanton who made the final identification. Some now believe that a dupe was used and that the real John Wilkes Booth escaped with Stanton's assistance. Mary Todd Lincoln, upon hearing of her husband's death, began screaming, "Oh, that dreadful house." Earlier historians felt that this spontaneous utterance referred to the White House. But some now believe that it may have been directed to Thomas W. House, a gun runner, financier, and agent of the Rothschilds during the Civil War, who was linked to the anti-Lincoln pro-banker interests. Thomas W. House was the father of Colonel Edward Mandell House, who later became the key player in the election of Woodrow Wilson and the passage of the Federal Reserve Act. So this name will lurk behind history more as we go on. Well, Andrew Jackson was the first president from the west of the Appalachians. He was unique for the time in being elected by voters without the direct support of a recognized political organization. He vetoed the renewal of the Charter of the Bank of the United States on July 10th of 1832. In 1835, President Andrew Jackson declared his disdain for the international bankers. Quote, "You are a den of vipers. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out. If the people only understood the rank injustice of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution before morning." There followed an unsuccessful assassination attempt on President Jackson's life. Jackson told his vice president, Martin Van Buren, "The bank, Mr. Van Buren, is trying to kill me." How interesting. Was this the beginning of a pattern of intrigue that would plague the White House itself over the coming decades? Was his and Abraham Lincoln's death related by an invisible thread to the international bankers? Well, James Garfield was the 20th president, previously chairman of the House Committee on Appropriations, and was an expert on fiscal matters. President Garfield openly declared that whosoever controls the supply of currency would control the business and activities of all the people. After only 4 months in office, President Garfield was shot at a railroad station on July 2nd, 1881. Another coincidence. For many years, numerous authors have attempted to sound the alarm that there exists a hidden shadow government that actually rules America. Most of us have dismissed these conspiracy theory views as extremist and unrealistic. Well, I had the opportunity to have lunch with Otto von Habsburg, a member of the European Parliament. His father ruled Europe until the end of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire in 1918. And while we had lunch, he made two remarks that really caught my attention. The first remark he made, I understood. He said, "The ignorance in America is overwhelming." And indeed, anyone that's sensitive here realizes that there's a contrast in the general awareness of world affairs between the average American and the average European. It's quite striking. When I had an office in London, the staff there was more aware of what was going on in California than our own staff in California did. They just have an appetite for what world events. Amazingly so, and America is surprisingly ignorant in those areas. But the second remark he made really puzzled me at the time. He said the concentration of power in America is frightening. Now, as a chief executive, I've served 30 years in the corporate boardrooms. I thought I was reasonably well informed, and I didn't have a thought of what on earth he was talking about when he said it. Later, I began to realize that what he was alluding to, but that came later. The Federal Reserve. This is one of the myths that all Americans live with, and it's a deceptive charade known as the Federal Reserve. It comes as a shock to many to discover that it is not an agency of the United States government. The Federal Reserve, that name was designed to deceive, and it still does. It is not federal, nor is it owned by the government. It is privately owned. It pays its own postage like any other corporation. Its employees are not in civil service. The physical property is held under private deeds and is subject to local taxation. Government property is not. So see, it masquerades as a government agency, but it's not. It is an engine that has created private wealth that is unimaginable, even to the most financially sophisticated. It has enabled an imperial elite to manipulate our economy for its own agenda and enlisted the government itself as its enforcer. It controls the times, dictates business, affects our homes, and practically everything in which we're interested. Few Americans know about the betrayal that was plotted on Jekyll Island, Georgia, that was destined to defraud Americans of their wealth, opportunity, and would eventually lead to the subjugation of our great democratic experiment into a centralized global dictatorship. And that's the building that they used there in Jekyll Island. In November of 1910, after having consulted with the Rothschild banks in England, France, and Germany, Senator Nelson Aldrich boarded a private train in Hoboken, New Jersey. His destination was Jekyll Island, Georgia, and a private hunting club owned by J.P. Morgan. Aboard the train were 6 other men: Benjamin Strong, president of Morgan's Bankers Trust Company; Charles Norton, president of Morgan's First National Bank of New York; Henry Davidson, senior partner of J.P. Morgan; Frank Vanderlip, president of Kuhn Loeb's National City Bank, and his quote I'll lean on in a minute; and we got Andrew, Secretary of the Treasury, and Paul Warburg. These were the 7 people in total going there, a secret meeting. Here is Vanderlip's quote. "There was an occasion near the close of 1910 when I was as secretive, indeed as furtive as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. We were told to leave our last names behind us. We were told further that we should avoid dining together on the night of our departure. We were instructed to come one at a time, where Senator Aldrich's private car would be in readiness attached to the rear end of the train to the south. Once aboard the private car, we began to observe the taboo that had been fixed on last names. Discovery, we knew, simply must not happen, or else all our time and effort would be wasted." And this was all published in the Saturday Evening Post back in February 8th of 1935. The goal was to establish a private bank that would control the national currency. The challenge was to slip the scheme by the representatives of the American people. Earlier it had been called the Aldrich Bill and received effective opposition. The devious planners of the revised bill titled it the Federal Reserve Act to mask its real nature. It would create a system controlled by private individuals who would control the nation's issue of money. Furthermore, the Federal Reserve Board, composed of 12 districts and 1 director, the Federal Reserve Chairman, would control the nation's financial resources by controlling the money supply, the available credit, and all by mortgaging the government through borrowing. The conspirators had a problem, however. President William Howard Taft had made it clear he would veto such a bill if it was introduced. They had to make sure he would not win re-election. At first, they supported ex-President Teddy Roosevelt in the Republican primaries, but he failed to get the nomination. Then the bankers supported the Democratic contender, Woodrow Wilson. In exchange for their support, Wilson promised to sign their bill into law. But the problem was that the polls indicated that Wilson would only draw about 45% of the votes. The bankers needed someone who could draw a sufficient number of Republican votes away from Taft without harming the Democratic candidate. So they arranged for Teddy Roosevelt to run against both men by representing a newly invented third party, the Bull Moose Party. The plan worked. The Federal Reserve Bill was held until December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, before it was presented to the House and Senate. Only those senators and congressmen who had not gone home for the holidays, those who owed favors to or were on the payroll of the bankers, were present to sign the legislation. Involved behind the scenes were the elections of Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt, was Colonel Edward Mandell House, the son of the Civil War Rothschild agent Thomas W. House. Colonel Edward House represented the interests of the Rothschild banks and was originally a member of the Institute of International Affairs, formed in Paris at the Majestic Hotel in a secret meeting on May 30th of 1919. Its American branch, formed in July 29th, 1921, became the Council for Foreign Relations, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Well, the charade begins. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was a deliberate charade to pacify the American voters. They had been crying out for a banking reform and held scores of elections alternating one set of politicians with another, only to find themselves with the same programs and deeper in debt. Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh, Sr., had complained at the time, quote, "It is a common practice of congressmen to make the title of the acts promise a right, but in the body of the text of the acts, they rob the people of what is promised in the title." Lindbergh pointed out that the government of office holders understood that, quote, that by joining with the banking interest to exploit the people, their re-election is more certain than if they serve the people who elect them. By joining the exploiters, their campaign expenses are paid, the support of the machines and the capital press is assured, and if by chance they should lose, they are appointed to the same office that should suit them equally or better. And that same phenomenon is visible today. The same cast of characters emerge in key positions whether the nation votes Democratic or Republican. Both sides appear to have sold out. And this tradition of betrayal has continued in the North American Free Trade Agreement and with the GATT's agreement, both of which were called agreements to avoid having to pass a two-thirds majority of the Senate. However, the White House Internet files immediately labeled them treaties as soon as they were passed. Even Woodrow Wilson himself felt that he had made a terrible mistake in signing the bill. He later wrote, quote, interesting quote, you read it often, "Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." That's a quote from Woodrow Wilson himself. See, the name of Federal Reserve was designed to deceive, and it still does. It is not federal, nor is it owned by the government. It is privately owned. It pays its own postage like any other corporation. Its employees are not in civil service. The physical property is held in private deeds, and it's subject to local taxation. Government property is not. It's an engine that has created private wealth that is unimaginable even to the most financially sophisticated. It has enabled an imperial elite to manipulate our economy for its own agenda and enlisted the government itself as its enforcer. It controls the times, dictates the business, and affects our homes and practically everything in which we are interested. How does it work? The Federal Reserve System is nothing more than a group of private banks which charge interest on money that never existed. The government prints $1 billion worth of interest-bearing U.S. government bonds, takes them to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve accepts them and places $1 billion in a checking account, and the government writes checks to the total of $1 billion. Where was that $1 billion before they touched the computer to make the entry? It didn't exist. We allow this private banking system to create money out of absolutely nothing, all in it as a loan to our government, and charge interest on it forever. The bank collects the interest on the government's own money. Now, this is a summary of a highly complex system. It's just a summary, but it's accurate. That's really what goes on. It's interesting, a communique sent from the Rothschild Investment House in England to its associate in New York office remarked following, "The few who understand the system will either be so interested in its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. While on the other hand, the great body of people, mentally incapable of comprehending, will bear its burdens without complaint." How descriptive that is. Now, Thomas Jefferson spoke out. He says, "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Already they have raised up a money aristocracy that has set the government at defiance. That issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the government to whom it belongs." Now, that's when I reflect on what Otto von Habsburg tried to tell me. The concentration of power in America is frightening. Well, President John F. Kennedy planned to exterminate the Federal Reserve System and ultimately eliminate its national debt, as had Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln before him, when they did the same to the two Rothschild-organized central banks back then. So in 1963, here's the key thing. In 1963, by presidential order of John F. Kennedy, the United States Treasury began printing over $4 billion worth of United States notes to replace the Federal Reserve notes in circulation. When a sufficient supply of these notes entered circulation, the Federal Reserve notes and the system could be declared obsolete. This would end the control of the international bankers over the U.S. government and the American people. That was his plan. Okay? Some of the bills that were thus printed can still be found. They can be recognized by the distinctive red seal on the front of the bill instead of the green seal of the Federal Reserve notes. Above the portrait appears the words United States note, not Federal Reserve note. Both $2 and $5 notes were printed. Series 1963, and C. Douglas Dillon's signature appears as Secretary of the Treasury. Now, if you look on the internet, they will explain to you how these things do not exist. You can't find any trace of them. And the reserves, by the way, the reverse side of these bills is identical to the Federal Reserve notes. But if you go on the internet, you'll find they don't exist. And search as you will. But here is a photograph of them. And I actually have handled these. And they look exactly like the Federal Reserve note, except it's United States notes, and all the details are as shown. After putting this plan into effect, John F. Kennedy was professionally assassinated in Dealey Plaza. And the existence of those notes are tangible evidence of what I'm telling you is the truth. And we'll move on here. We all know, if you know Dealey Plaza, you remember that famous travel route that was laid out by LBJ for the occasion. And here's a map of the kill zone, as it's called. And there were 3 teams plus a diversionary team in key places. Team number 1 fired the first throat shot as they came around. Team 2 of the Daltex building missed. A ricochet hit a pedestrian, not seriously. The diversionary team missed a shot across. The Team 3 on top of the Dallas County Records building was able to get the back shot, and that became so controversial. And the diversionary team caught Connolly, Governor Connolly, in the front seat. And then on Team 1, they got the headshot, which, of course, killed the president. And so you got the names of these people are now known. Some diaries have been found. So there's much known today that was not recognized back then. And so that's a quick snapshot of it all. So the professional triangulated fire of the 3 primary teams and the diversionary teams that executed the president, that's not the most shocking issue. Anyone familiar with those operations recognizes right away the professionalism involved there. The shocking issue isn't the assassination. It's the high-level coordination that organized the widespread cover-up that is manifest evidence of the incredible power of a hidden government behind the scenes. What's more astonishing when you lay it out is the cover-up is more astonishing than the assassination itself. The subsequent cover-up was so skillful that even to this day, few Americans realize the coup d'etat that was engineered to save the system, the Federal Reserve System. And if you really want to get into that, we have a whole library as part of KI's library, but we have, of all of them, the outstanding document is a book you can get called by Craig Roberts, called Kill Zone, published in 1994. And it gives you, it's astonishing the details that it reveals there. Over 177 witnesses have died in the intervening years. And of course, evidence has been altered in more ways than we can dictate here. Oswald's rifle had to be altered to be fired. And the sight had been misaligned, it's astonishing. The experts at Quantico, the experts in the Mossad, and experts in Soviet Union all attempted to recreate the conditions and recognized it was not possible for Lee Harvey Oswald to do what they claim he did. Didn't have the time or the skills. Kennedy's autopsy procedures had lost the brain, which would have revealed bullet fragments that would have disproved the single bullet theories. The diary of Roscoe White, one of the Grassy Knoll shooters, were later found by his son and were ultimately confiscated. So the trail of blood continues. We won't dwell on that more, but in the 70s and 80s, Congressman Larry P. McDonald spearheaded efforts to expose the hidden holdings and intentions of the international money interests. His efforts ended on August 31st of 1983 when he was killed when the Korean Airlines 007 was accidentally shot down in Soviet airspace. Strange coincidence. Senator John Hines and former Senator John Tower had served on powerful Senate Banking and Finance committees and were outspoken critics of the Federal Reserve and the Eastern establishment. On the 4th of April 1991, Senator John Hines was killed in a plane crash near Philadelphia. The next day, on August 5th, former Senator John Tower was also killed in a plane crash. So the coincidences seem to mount. And lest we forget, the administrations since then have brought us the deaths of Vicki Weaver, deliberately shot by an FBI assassin. Paul Wiltshire wrote a letter to the Attorney General saying that if the letter falls in the wrong hands, he's a dead man. 4 days later, they found his body in his hotel room because it was the Attorney General in those days was Janet Reno. Danny Carcelero these are all people who died the day before they were going to give evidence, as well as Vince Foster, the deputy White House counsel. William Sessions came to work, was fired, ushered out of the building that morning. That night, Vince Foster's body is found in Fort Marcy Park, and while they're finding his body, Hillary Clinton is cleaning his files out of his private office. Ron Brown, Secretary of Commerce, on a trip to Europe, was assassinated on the trip. And William Colby, head of CIA, strangely committed suicide under strange conditions. Admiral Jeremy Borda, the highly regarded Chief of Naval Operations, a Mustang that made it all the way to CNO, committed suicide the day before he was going to make some presentations. And over 100 other mysterious deaths in that era. And a lot of this is summarized in a DVD called The Clinton Chronicles that was published by a guy by the name Patrick Matriciana, who is on our board of directors. So we're very close to the real details behind much of this. And of course, we could deal with the shocking events at Oklahoma City and Waco, where they used nerve gas to get the Branch Davidians before they could get out of the building before the fire started. And on it goes. Attempts to even simply audit the Federal Reserve continue to meet with failure. It turns out to be virtually impossible to muster support of any issue which has the benefit of a media blackout. I'll come back to that. The myth that once was, I call this, a painful blessing. That sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? A painful blessing. How can a blessing be painful? When it involves the puncture of a delusion. The analogy you can think of as a small child when he discovers there's no Santa Claus. That hurts, but it's essential, isn't it? And there are certain delusions that we need to be shed of if we're going to survive. And this is one of them, the myth that once was. They're unpleasant, but they're essential to our welfare. The concept of patriotism needs to be re-examined. Are you really giving your life for your country? Or is this really an obsolete form of idol worship to allow you to run errands for politicians. Are you really defending your country, or are you running errands for special interests of some kind? One of the things that in our times today, I think we all need to reassess carefully our allegiances. And I won't dwell on that. Most of you know of the attitudes that I now harbor. A loss of trust in the government. It's most nations love their country, but don't trust their government, except in America. We get confused about that. We get confused when you start talking about the country or the government separately. No, one of the important lessons to learn in your own background is to understand the difference between civil and common law. Civil law started in Rome, and it laws to protect the state, not the individual, the state. The great invention that emerged in Britain was common law. Laws that were designed to protect the individual against the state. What an innovation that was, and still is, where it can be found. But you need to understand it's the state is the enemy of the common law. So right now, our problem today is not just a few things, it's broad corruption. Corruption in the media, corruption in the executive branches, the legislative branch, the judiciary branch. In fact, corrupting the very institutions God instituted in the beginning. Let's talk about the media. We need to understand the distinction between bias and treason. Everyone in public life knows that the media is biased to the liberal side. No surprise. But it's quite a different thing than collusion to hide the truth from the American people. And the kind of collusion that exists in the last several elections should be tried as treason. It was conspiracy against the American people by the mainline medias. Make a list of things you don't know about the current presidential candidate. It's astonishing to make a list of what you don't know. You don't know one grade he took of it on any course he ever took. You can't find any achievement he made in any job he held, and so forth. See, the role of the free press in a democracy is to inform the electorate. That's their job. That's their mission. We have a media that takes pride in shaping opinion rather than informing it. That should be a crime in a democracy. Well, let's take a look at the executive branch. The abrogation of the separation of powers, totally disregarded by the current administration, the very thing the Constitution was designed to uphold. We have the establishment of a police state. That sounds shocking. Ask any competent attorney, and he'll explain to you why in the United States you're presently in a police state. The abrogation of the Bill of Rights, they're gone with a stroke of a pen. There's a deliberate agenda of destruction underfoot by a practicing Sunni Muslim in the White House. Check it out. It's no surprise. Let's take a look at the legislatures. We have a legislature that doesn't read the bills they sign. That should be a crime. That ignores any fiscal responsibility and that ignores the constitutional requirements. And then the judiciary itself. They ignore their constitutional obligation. That's why they exist. They overturn jury verdicts. They innovate social engineering. They fail to assure the separation of powers, their primary job. That leads us to the God-given institutions that are systematically being destroyed. The rights to worship, the rights to educate children, the rights to life, heterosex marriage, the sanctity of commitments of all shapes and sizes. Those are God-given institutions, all systematically being destroyed. So what does that lead to? I believe that leads to God's abandonment wrath. He doesn't have to do anything. All he has to do is remove his protections. That's what he did to Samson when on that last visit to Delilah. He simply removed that protection he had when Samson realized he couldn't break loose. Can you imagine how terrified he must have realized as he realized that God had abandoned him? In the northern kingdom, God commissions Hosea from the south to go lay out his indictment to the northern kingdom. He doesn't go there and preach unless you change, this is going to happen. No. He lays out what's going to happen. Why? Because they've joined themselves to idols. God says to Hosea, leave Ephraim alone. He's joined idols. All he did is remove his protection and let the Assyrians come and remove them from history, which they did. The southern kingdom had a similar pattern, except that he had a promise to David that was honored. But there again, as he explains to Habakkuk, that he was going to use their enemies as his form of punishment. The question before Americans today, what about the United States? The most common question I get asked when I travel is, why hasn't God judged America? Billy Graham himself quipped so many years ago, so cleverly, if God doesn't judge America, he'll have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Great soundbite. Good question. Thomas Jefferson said the same thing in 1781. I tremble for my country when I recall that God is just and that his justice will not sleep forever. That was Thomas Jefferson at the beginning. Is the USA, I personally suspect, I don't know, I personally suspect that God's abandonment wrath has begun already. And that's one reason I get so nervous when I read Ezekiel 39:6, because I tend to view America as a third power. We have Magog and Israel in attention, and there's a third party that's also clobbered. Incidental, collateral damage, you could call it, but it may be an overdue judgment. I'll let you look at that yourself. But let's realize it's not our job to make the changes or repair the damages. That's not our job. We need to understand them. We need to know what's going on around us, but it's not our job to repair the damages. We are to know Satan's devices. And Jesus instructed us several times, be not deceived. Great. How do you do that? It's a good question. You see, we need to keep our focus on his kingdom, not the world's. It's easy to get sucked into social justice issues because they're serious and they may need attention. But recognize they compete with what you may be called to do, which is declare the person of Jesus Christ. You need to recognize the tools and the agendas that are prevalent in what I like to call the age of deceit. It's astonishing to realize how deliberately deceitful the information we're given is. From the press and from the government, the lies are very systematic, very well understood to the professionals. More and more people are beginning to realize all that. So we have a very unique challenge to talk about here. You and I have the dilemma of trying to decipher nonlinearities which are mutually interactively impacting each other. In the past, you had a bull market or a bear market. You had a certain time where things were improving or not improving. You had an ability to somehow get a feeling for trends. And it was feasible to follow trends, try to sense them, take advantage of them. That's what most investors did for decades. But we're now in a strange world. It's probably the strangest investment world we've ever seen because there's crosswinds that contradict each other in every which way. Trying to decide, and they're nonlinear, and they're mutually interacting with each other. And so one of the tricks we are faced with having to deal with is discerning the emergence of counter trends correctly. Is it just a setback, or is there really a change in trends? And one of the dilemmas in the last several years, there isn't a clear trend to follow. There is an illusion of a recovery. Both Washington and Wall Street are working very hard to create the illusion of a recovery. And the stock indexes seem to be going up. There's all kinds of positive moods on the one hand until you look at the fundamentals. The jobs have not improved. There's a whole real fundamental issue. They've conned us to measure things by consumption. The consumer price index. That measures on what you're buying, not what you're producing. And if you're willing to incur debt, you can create the illusion of a lifestyle by doing it on debt. And that's the trap. That's the trap. Let's take a look at a summary by Bromberg. Just when debt-addicted American companies were starting to worry that the Federal Reserve Chair, Janet Yellen, the Federal Reserve Chairman, was going to take their proverbial punch bowl away, along came Mario Draghi. Now, Mario Draghi is a name you might know. He's president of the European Bank. The European Central Bank president has made borrowing so cheap in the region that foreign corporations are selling record amounts of debt. See, the problem we have already, there's too much debt. The answer isn't more debt, but everybody is racing to increase debt. Forget the deeper, bigger U.S. corporate bond market. Borrowing in euro is all the rage these days because it's about 2 percentage points less expensive to do so. About 65% of the record 60 billion euro investment-grade bonds sold in March came from overseas companies, according to the March 27th Bank of America report. And a lot of those sellers are based in the U.S. The trend comes down to basic math. Yields on investment-grade bonds in Europe have fallen to 0.99%, in other words, under 1%, compared with 2.9% on those in the U.S., according to the Bank of America Merrill Lynch index data. So like all borrowing binges, this one is also likely to end badly, according to Bloomberg. They're probably right. But it's very, very strange that, on the one hand, the central banks are working hard to keep the interest down, yet that interest is going to backfire on them, of course. So there's a tool I want to introduce you to. If you're analytically oriented, you may want to pick up on this and do a little homework. A tool, I call it a tool for our time. It's called Bayes' theorem. If you had a course in statistics, it's familiar to you. Bayes' theorem was proposed originally by Thomas Bayes in the 18th century, and it combines newly acquired data with prior data to predict an outcome. You got old data, some new data now. How do you put that together to get a new perspective? That's what Bayes' theorem deals with. It combines these data in a formula. And the probability of A given B is the conditional probability of A given B. And the B slant A is a conditional probability that B given A. Those are the two basic things. Bayes' theorem is named after Thomas Bayes, who first showed how to use the new evidence to update previous beliefs. It was further developed by Pierre-Simon Laplace, who first published the modern formulation in his 1812 French document. Sir Harold Jeffreys put Bayes' algorithm and Laplace's formulation on an axiomatic basis. Jeffreys wrote that Bayes' theorem is to the theory of probability what Pythagoras' theorem is to geometry. So it's a basic thing. Let me give you just an illustration. If you can follow it, great. If not, you can double back on your own. You can get all this on the internet quite well. Professor Bradley Efron of Stanford University presents an example of predicting whether twins are likely to be fraternal or identical in his overview of the theorem. In this example, there are two categories of data to be considered. The prior data, the fact that 1/3 of twins are identical, and the newly acquired data, that sonograms show a pregnant woman is carrying twin boys. Identical twins are twice as likely to produce twin boy sonograms because identical twins are always the same sex, while fraternal twins have only a 50-50 chance of being the same sex. Okay, so in Bayes' theorem, it combines these in this formula. And so in this example, A is the twins being identical, a prior probability of 1 in 3. B is the sonogram shows twin boys. The genetics imply that B given A is 1/2, giving the probability that A given B is 1/2 times 1/3 divided by 1/3, or in other words, altogether 1/2. The formula correctly predicts that the twins have an equal probability of being either fraternal or identical. That's true logically, but the interesting thing is that's what the Bayes' theorem lays out as you apply it. And you can take that more carefully at your casual if you want. Let me give you, in probability theory, Bayes' theorem relates the current probability to a prior probability. It is important in mathematical manipulation of conditional probabilities. When applied, the probabilities involved in Bayes' theorem may yield different interpretations. In one of these interpretations, the theorem is used directly as part of a particular approach to statistical inference. In particular, with the Bayesian interpretation of probability, the theorem expresses how a subjective degree of belief should rationally change to account for experience. And this is Bayesian inference, which is fundamental to Bayesian statistics. However, Bayes' theorem has applications in a wide range of calculations involving probabilities, not just Bayesian inference. Let me give you a second example of the power of this. The entire output of a factory is produced on 3 machines. They account for 20%, 30%, 50% of the output, respectively. the three machines. The fraction of defective items produced is this. For the first machine, 5%, second machine, 3%, third machine, 1%. If an item is chosen at random from the total output and is found to be defective, what is the probability that it was produced on the third machine is the question. How do you answer that? Well, the solution is as follows. Let A sub I denote the event for a randomly chosen item made by the ith machine, for I being 1, 2, or 3, machine number 1, 2, or 3. Let B denote the event that a randomly chosen item is defective. Then we have been given the following information. If we apply those three a priori numbers, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.5, if the machine was made by A, then the probability if it's defective is 0.05. That is a way to express it. And so we have those three numbers, the 0.05, 0.03, 0.01. To answer the original question was find the probability of B alone. That can be done the following way. You combine all of those, weight them, and thus 2.4% of the total output of the factory that is defective. We are given that B has occurred, and we want to calculate the conditional probability of A3 by Bayes' theorem. We find it's 5/24. Given that the item is defective, the probability that it was made by the third machine is only 5/24. Although the machine number 3 produces half the total output, it produces a much smaller fraction of the defective items. Hence, the knowledge that the item selected was defective enables us to replace the a priori, the prior probability, 3 by half, by the smaller probability of 5/24. We can turn that whole idea around the other way, and that's where I'm headed here. Enter a technique that goes by names calling causal inference or inverse probability. Based on the mathematical equation called Bayes' theorem, you form a hypothesis based on experience, common sense, and whatever data are available. Then you test the hypothesis not by what has happened before, but what comes after. You turn around the other way. Instead of reasoning from cause to effect, you reverse the process. You watch the effects to determine the cause. This will validate or invalidate the cause that you have hypothesized. Sometimes the effects contradict the hypothesis, in which you modify or abandon it or adopt another. Often, though, the effects confirm the hypothesis, in which case you know you're on the right track and you keep going. So that's applying it in the inverse. The theorem has proved its worth, such as in 2012 when it was used to successfully predict the outcome of the U.S. presidential election in all 50 states before the final vote counts were available. That comes as quite a surprise. But despite its success, it has always been regarded with some suspicion by statisticians, particularly because it has been used when genuine prior data is unavailable or uncertain. And you can dig this all out on the internet if you have an interest in that. So, let's take another example. Another specific hypothesis is that the world is facing a $2 trillion tsunami of bad debt, which is coming from three places: from oil drilling, emerging markets, and the corporate junk bonds. Even money-losing operations can keep up debt service for a while by using working capital and cash flow, at least until the cash runs out. Banks, which hold some of the debt, can also cover up the losses for a while with accounting games such as fiddling with what are called their loan loss reserves. So it takes a while for these things to come home to roost. Bank stocks could well take a hit by early 2016 as these losses come home to roost. Well, using the language of Bayes' theorem, we'll let bad debts be the cause of a drop in financial stocks. What are the effects to test the validity of this hypothesis? Well, for energy junk debt, we can look at rig counts in the oil patch and layoffs among the energy exploration companies. For emerging market debt, we can look at the strong dollar and dwindling hard currency reserves in countries like Russia, Turkey, Mexico, and Brazil. We can work backward from these visible causes to test the validity of the original hypothesis. The idea that financial stocks will suffer due to the write-offs by this time next year looks like a good bet. It's the net of it all. So I wanted to give you enough to dig into this if you have an appetite for it, an aptitude for it. But my encouragement would build your own model and test your own hypothesis. And I'm going to encourage you to have some good hunting. So that's a tool you can use as we face the uncertainties that surround us. But let me remind you, it's not our job to predict the future. Divination is prohibited in the Bible. We're not here to predict the future. But it is our responsibility to prepare for the coming storms. There's a difference. And as Drucker would say, note the futurism of today's decisions. Decisions you make today have an impact on tomorrow. You need to understand the futurity of today's decisions. A Jewish proverb picks it up in a little differently. A Jewish proverb says, I'd rather be a year too soon than 10 minutes too late. Let's bow our hearts for a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for who you are. We thank you for your presence, and we thank you for giving us the opportunity to glean from your word that which you would have for us. We pray, Father, that through your Holy Spirit, you would guide us, that we each might discover just what it is that you would have of us in response for the days ahead. We thank you, Father, for the opportunities in advance. We pray, Father, you, through your Holy Spirit and through your word, would help us to be ever more effective for you in the days ahead as we commit ourselves into your hands without any reservations whatsoever. In the name of Yeshua, our coming King indeed. Amen.